So in this video, I'm going to make a list of all the common arguments made by proponents of modern architecture, and I'm going to debunk each of these arguments one by one. Now, I know they use a lot of different arguments, but these are the most common ones that I've seen. So if anyone can think of any other arguments that are commonly used, please leave them in the comment section and I could address these as well. So I'm going to go through these one by one. The first argument. We have an expanding population today like never before in history, and that justifies creating cheaper, quicker structures that can be more efficiently built. Well, that might have been a valid argument in the 1950s, but today, if not for mass immigration, all Western societies would actually have a declining population rather than a growing one. If we assume that we on the alt-right are all against mass immigration, then this argument is a moot point. The next argument. Creating new buildings in traditional styles or reconstructing destroyed ones would be fake and pastiche rather than genuine. Okay, going along with the Theseus's ship analogy, what exactly constitutes being genuine or real? If the windows, bricks, or various other features in an original building have been replaced over time for maintenance reasons, or if it has been repainted, is that building still real? How old does a building have to be in order to be considered real or genuine? If your argument is that these old buildings are only genuine if they are true products of their time, what about buildings that were built in the 18th century but were built in a 16th century style? Are those genuine? Are they real? Should we knock those down? Also, if your argument is that styles change over time, who is it to say that the current modernist styles must be permanent? Couldn't a shift back to certain more traditional styles or new variations on those traditional styles be an organic change that society could still undergo at this point? Couldn't it be conceivable that one day we're going to recognize new variations on traditional architecture as 2020s architecture or 2030s architecture? Next argument. Nice buildings that were built in past eras were built only for the upper class and not for the middle or lower class. The middle and lower class lived in shacks and hovels. Commie blocks, as we build them today, or have built them in the past half century, are a far better alternative to this style of living for the poor. Well, that is not entirely accurate. If you look at many different villages and towns across Europe, you can see plenty of buildings that were built for the common folk and not simply for the aristocracy that are very beautiful and very aesthetically pleasing. I think people who make this argument like to point out a few specific examples like Paris tenement housing, like the homes for the poor in attics of beautiful buildings in Paris, while ignoring the many other examples of beautiful homes that were in fact for the common folk. Next argument. Old buildings are inconvenient and uncomfortable to live in. Well, if that's the case, then why do so many wealthy people choose to live in them? These two arguments actually kind of contradict themselves because one is saying that aesthetically pleasing buildings are only for the rich, and then the next is saying, well, they're undesirable. And it's like, wait a second, if they're undesirable, then why do a lot of wealthy people in cities like Paris choose to live in these buildings? Next argument. Modernist architecture is innovative and brilliant. Well, much like that early 20th century artwork with the urinal as the drinking fountain, you can only do the same work of art so many times before it becomes a stale cliche in and of itself. While it may have at least seemed different and novel at one time, to say nothing of its actual quality, it has long since become a cliche. We need something new. Modern is the new cliche. Next argument. Beauty is subjective. There is no such thing as better architecture or more beautiful architecture. Well, the idea that beauty or art in general is subjective is a gigantic misnomer. You can monitor people's reactions to something to gauge whether or not it elicits a positive or negative response. If something elicits a positive response in almost everyone, or a negative or indifferent response in almost everyone, then I would say that that is a measure of objective quality. There is a reason why more tourists go to Prague or Rome than to a city like Kansas City or Novosibirsk. You can say that feces or skunk secretions don't objectively smell bad, or that roses don't objectively smell good. But the reality of the situation is that people will near unanimously perceive it that way. Next argument, modern architecture is more efficient. Well, there is a lot to be said for the short-term efficiency of mass importing millions of low-paid third world workers as well. But we all know what the long-term consequences of that is. If we've established that efficiency is not our only goal, but also the creation and preservation of a national culture, then art and architecture suddenly become very important methods of the expression of a national culture and mythos. They're necessary toward creating that sense of pride and engendering a positive feeling of community and of belief in your own country and your own civilization. So even if it is more efficient in the short term, in the long term, this kind of architecture can create depression. It can create a feeling of alienation and listlessness. And I think it is one of the contributing factors to why rates of depression are rising across the world today. Not only the Western world, but in countries like Japan and South Korea, where there's also plenty of modernist architecture. Next argument. Styles naturally evolve and change over time. This is true. However, previous styles before World War II all incorporated some elements of traditionalism, reflecting the local culture or the broader Western culture, even if the specifics differed. However, with modernism came a total rejection of form, cultural context, naturalism, and the emulation of beauty altogether. Next argument. People in the 18th century would have said that 16th century architecture was better than the current architecture too. Well, as with my previous argument, it's entirely possible that such opinions existed and that, yes, they may have had some validity by the standards of their time. That being said, even if we accept the premise that maybe there was a decline in architecture, not only in the 20th century, but even beforehand, a gradual decline, and that people were complaining about the same things, that being said, it wasn't until the 20th century, specifically the mid-20th century and the post-war period, when we started seeing the total eschewing of form and cultural context and aesthetic quality altogether. Okay, so those are my opinions. And again, like, some people will also make arguments like, well, how do you define what is traditional architecture? Is Art Deco traditional or is that modern? Again, like, these questions are red herrings. Just because there's an ambiguous middle ground doesn't mean that such a thing as traditional architecture, such a thing as modern architecture don't exist. In the same way that when people say, oh, how can you say there's such a thing as the white race when there are people like Armenians or Georgians or Cypriots who are ambiguous? And again, it's a misnomer. Okay, it's irrelevant to the overall question. Is Art Deco traditional or modern? I don't know. Some of it looks more traditional, some looks more modern. It doesn't really matter because there is such a thing as traditional architecture and as modern architecture. So those are some of my arguments right there. I'm sure there are many other commonly made arguments by people. One of the biggest arguments is also just traditional architecture is more expensive. To that, I also have two replies. Firstly, a lot of modernist stuff is very expensive too. Some of the fancier stuff, like the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, that was super expensive. Same with the completely unnecessary addition to the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. Now, that's talking about a very specific type of modern architecture, the more gaudy and showy types. When we're talking about the more utilitarian types of modern architecture, it's true, traditional architecture does tend to be a bit more costly. However, it also tends to be longer lasting based on the materials being used and the care that is put into it. And also, to be quite honest, I think that's a price I'm willing to pay. If you accept the premise that it's important to have a healthy sense of national self-esteem, a healthy birth rate, and a country that believes in itself, then I'd say that's an extra price I'm more than willing to pay. And imagine if we stop paying for all these refugees and migrants from countries like Somalia, if we stop paying for their welfare and we put that money into building better architecture instead. Wouldn't that be a much better use of that money? So anyway, those are some of the main arguments right there. In the comments, you can post if you have disagreements or if you have other other arguments made by proponents of modern architecture that I could address or that you'd like to address, feel free to do so. All right, that's all for now.